The streets were crowded as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the city. People hurried by, lost in their own worlds, their eyes fixed on their phones or the ground. But in the middle of the bustling crowd, a woman stood, her face pale and tired, holding a small child in her arms. The child was silent, eyes wide and empty. Her ragged clothes barely kept the cold at bay, and her body shook with hunger and exhaustion. She had nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to. The city had turned its back on her long ago. Her people, her own kind, had abandoned her. Now, she was alone, a stranger in a foreign land, desperate to keep her child alive. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse and trembling. "Please, just a little food for my baby. He's hungry, we're both starving." Her words barely rose above the noise of the crowd, but she didn't care. She needed someone, anyone, to hear her. The people around her moved past without a second glance. No one slowed their pace. No one stopped to help. She watched as a man bumped into her shoulder, his eyes never even meeting hers. A woman with a baby in her arms smiled at her child but kept walking. The city was a cold place, and her pleas seemed to be swallowed by the cold wind that blew through the streets. She looked down at her child, whose tiny face was pale with hunger. His lips trembled, and his eyes seemed to ask why no one was helping. The woman's heart broke as she gently rocked him, trying to soothe him, even as her own body screamed for rest. "Please," she whispered again, her voice cracking. "I just need some help. Just a little food, and I promise we'll go away, we'll disappear. Please, I can't watch him suffer anymore." But the world didn't seem to care. The noise of the city grew louder in her ears, drowning out her words. She glanced at the people passing by, their faces cold and indifferent, lost in their own worlds. She felt like a ghost, unseen and forgotten. A few feet away, a man stood watching her. He wasn't like the others. His eyes were soft, filled with something, pity, concern. But he didn't move. He didn't approach. Instead, he looked around as though waiting for someone else to step in. But no one did. The world kept moving around her, and she remained invisible, trapped in the endless stream of faces that didn't care. She took a step forward, trying again, hoping for some kind of response. "Please, just a little food. My baby needs it. I don't know how much longer we can keep going like this." Still, no one heard her. The man's gaze stayed on her, but he didn't come any closer. Was he just another person who would ignore her? Would he turn away too? She felt the weight of her hopelessness pressing down on her chest, suffocating her. She tried to call out once more, but her voice failed her. Her body was too weak, her mind too clouded by hunger. She dropped to her knees, her legs unable to hold her anymore. She held her child tightly, her arms shaking as tears welled up in her eyes. She didn't want to cry, not in front of him. She needed to be strong for him, but the weight of everything was too much. Her heart was breaking, and the world kept spinning on, uncaring and cruel. The crowd kept moving. A few people glanced at her, but no one stopped. No one even gave a second thought to the alien mother kneeling in the dirt, begging for help. A few more steps away, a man in a dark coat passed by, a briefcase in hand. He didn't even look at her. But then something strange happened. A young boy no older than 5 tugged at the man's sleeve. "Look, Daddy," he said, pointing toward the alien woman and child. "They look hungry. Should we help them?" The man glanced at the woman, his expression unreadable. For a moment it seemed like he might pass by too, just like everyone else. But then his eyes softened. He crouched down next to the boy and looked at the woman. The boy continued to stare at her, his little face filled with confusion. "Why? Are they hungry?" The man's eyes hardened slightly, but there was something else there now, something that made him hesitate. The boy's innocent question seemed to be the last straw for the man. He stepped toward the woman. "Are you okay?" His voice was low, soft, but the kindness in his eyes was unmistakable. The woman looked up at him, blinking in surprise. She hadn't expected anyone to speak to her, let alone offer help. "Please, she said again, her voice barely a whisper. Please help us. We have nowhere else to go. No one cares. They just pass by. Just like you. The man's gaze softened. He looked at her, then at the child in her arms. There was a long silence before he spoke again, his voice quiet but firm. I'm here now. I'll help you. In that moment, something changed. The world around her still felt cold and unfeeling, but at least now, there was one person who saw her. One person who wasn't walking away. And for the first time in days, the alien mother allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was hope. This opening establishes the main character's desperation, the harsh indifference of the world around her, and the first glimmer of hope through the human man. It draws the audience in with emotion and suspense, setting the stage for the rest of the story. The alien mother could barely stand, but she was determined to stay upright, to remain in the small patch of sunlight that fell across her tired body. She looked down at her child, whose eyes had started to droop, exhausted from the journey. The world seemed to have forgotten them. Here on this crowded street, she was invisible. No one looked at her, no one cared. The city was a place of indifference, where the desperate and the poor were pushed to the side, out of sight, out of mind. She had once thought of Earth as a land of kindness, where people would help those in need. But the more she saw, the more she realized how wrong she had been. As the crowd surged around her, she couldn't help but feel the weight of her isolation. Why are we here? She whispered, mostly to herself, but the words felt like a prayer. Why did they leave us? Her people, her family, had abandoned her when she needed them most. She had fought so hard to get to Earth, to escape the war-torn world she had once called home. But now, she was just another beggar on a strange planet, ignored by all who passed by. Her mind wandered back to the days before, to the family she had once had. She had been an honored member of her people, strong, capable, with a future ahead of her. But all of that had changed in an instant. The invasion had taken everything from her. Her home, her family, her friends, all lost in a single brutal attack. And now, all that remained was the faint hope that she might give her child a chance at life. She had always been taught that survival was about strength, about overcoming adversity. But now, she wasn't sure what survival meant anymore. What good was strength when there was no one to help, no one to care? She had nothing left but her child, and she would do anything to keep him safe. But even that seemed like a distant dream now. Her arms ached from holding him for so long, and her stomach twisted with hunger. Please, please help us, she begged, her voice soft and weak. The city continued to move, indifferent to her pain. The sounds of laughter and chatter filled the air, but none of it was for her. She watched as a group of children ran past, laughing and playing, and felt a pang of sorrow. Her child would never experience that joy. He would never run and laugh in the streets like those kids. A man walked by, his face buried in his phone. She could see his eyes flicking across the screen, never once pausing to look at her. It was as if she didn't exist at all. She wanted to scream at him, to ask him why he didn't see her, why he didn't see her child. But the words stuck in her throat. She was too weak, too tired to shout. All she could do was watch as people walked past her without a care in the world. Her child shifted in her arms, stirring slightly. She smiled at him weakly, brushing a lock of hair from his face. "We'll be okay," she whispered to him, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. The man who had stopped earlier was still watching her, standing a few feet away. She didn't know what to make of him. He was different from the others. There was something in his eyes, a softness, a kindness, that stood out against the hardness of everyone else. But he hadn't come closer. He hadn't offered anything. He had simply watched her suffer. She couldn't understand why he hadn't left, though. Why hadn't he moved on like the rest of them? What was he waiting for? "Please help us," she whispered again, but her words felt empty, lost in the noise of the city. She was so tired, so drained. Her body felt like it was no longer her own, weighed down by hunger and exhaustion. Every muscle ached, Every bone felt like it might break. The human man shifted his weight, hesitating. He was still standing there, staring at her. It felt like hours had passed, though it had only been moments. I don't know what to do, he muttered to himself, his voice barely audible. The woman's heart sank as she saw him turn to walk away. Please. The word came out of her mouth without thinking. She didn't know what else to say. She was powerless, helpless, and the worst part was that she had no idea how much longer she could keep going. But then, something unexpected happened. The man stopped. His footsteps paused and he turned back to face her. She saw him reach into his pocket, pulling out a small pouch of credits. His fingers fumbled for a moment and then he stepped forward, holding it out to her. Here, he said, his voice low. It's not much, but it will help. Please, take it. She looked at the pouch, then back up at him. She was surprised, unsure whether to take it. Her pride wanted to stop her, to tell her that she didn't need charity. But the truth was, she had nothing left but her child, and her child needed food. Tears welled in her eyes as she reached out, her hand trembling. Thank you, she whispered, barely able to speak through the lump in her throat. The man smiled gently, a flicker of warmth in his eyes. You don't have to thank me. Just take care of your son, that's all that matters. For the first time in a long while, the woman allowed herself to believe in something again. The world hadn't completely turned its back on her. There was still kindness to be found even in the darkest corners of this city, but as she clutched the pouch tightly in her hand, she knew that this was just the beginning. There was much more to survive, much more to face, and she would do it, no matter what. This part builds on the mother's emotional state, her desperate situation, and the small glimmer of hope that the human offers. The emotional beats are designed to draw the viewer in and make them invested in her survival, while keeping the suspense alive with the uncertain future. The woman's fingers trembled as she held the pouch of credits in her hand. It felt so insignificant, yet in that moment it was everything. She didn't know who this man was or why he had stopped to help, but she knew one thing for sure. He was the first person to care. Her child, still weak, shifted in her arms, a soft whimper escaping his lips. She glanced down at him, her heart heavy with the burden of knowing just how little she could provide. The pouch in her hand was enough for only one meal, maybe two, but it wouldn't solve the real problem. Surviving in a city that had long forgotten her kind. Thank you, she whispered again, her voice barely audible, still stunned by the act of kindness. The man didn't speak at first, but his gaze softened as he looked at her. He seemed to hesitate, caught in a moment of indecision. His eyes darted around the crowded street as if searching for something. It wasn't long before his gaze fell back on her, and in the silence that followed, she could feel his thoughts swirling. He took a deep breath, his brow furrowing as if trying to understand the situation. Then, with a slow step forward, he spoke softly. What's your name? Her eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't expected him to ask anything. She had assumed that this act of kindness would end here, with him handing over the pouch and walking away, but now he was asking about her. He wanted to know more. I don't have a name here, she replied, her voice shaky. Not in this place. My people, they call me Tara. But that doesn't matter now. The man frowned at her words, his expression filled with confusion. What do you mean? Everyone has a name. You're not just, nothing. His tone softened, his hand instinctively reaching out toward her. You're not invisible, you know. Tara looked up at him, her heart aching with the weight of his words. For so long she had felt like a shadow, just another forgotten soul in a city full of indifferent faces. To hear him say that she wasn't invisible was like a balm on a wound she didn't know how to heal. Thank you, she whispered again, but this time there was more than gratitude in her voice. It was the sound of someone starting to believe that they might not have to face the world alone anymore. For a brief moment, She allowed herself to breathe, to close her eyes, and let the weight of the world lift just a little. She had been ready to give up, to believe that there was no place for her and her child. But this man, this stranger, had shattered that belief. She had no idea who he was, or why he had chosen to help her, but in her heart, she knew she couldn't walk away from this moment. The man looked around again, his eyes scanning the city, as though searching for something. He seemed uneasy, as if he knew something she didn't. "Come with me," he said suddenly, his voice low but firm. "You and your child, follow me, I can help you." She hesitated, uncertainty creeping in. There were still so many questions, so many doubts. Why was he offering to help her? What did he want from her in return? There had to be a catch. There always was. The world didn't give out kindness without expecting something in return. But her instincts, worn and broken as they were, told her to trust him. There was something in his eyes, something real and human, that made her believe in the possibility of hope. Maybe it was because for the first time in weeks she wasn't begging for help from strangers who turned away. This man was offering it freely, without expecting anything back. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Somewhere safe," he replied simply. "You won't be alone anymore." His words were enough to push her forward. She had nothing left to lose. Her child needed her, and she needed a way out of this nightmare. She couldn't keep begging on the streets. She couldn't keep watching her son fade away. So she nodded, weakly at first, then with more certainty as she followed him. "Thank you," she said again, this time with more conviction. "Thank you for not leaving us." The man didn't answer immediately, but the soft smile on his lips spoke volumes. He was leading her through the crowded streets, careful to stay out of sight, as though he feared someone might see them. His footsteps were quick, but he made sure she was able to keep up. It was only then that Tara noticed how worn he looked, how exhausted he seemed beneath the surface. This man wasn't just helping her, he was taking a risk. As they walked, Tara's mind raced. Who was this man? Why had he stopped to help? What was his story? But there were no answers, only more questions. The weight of her own desperation was heavy on her shoulders, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She had learned to trust no one, and yet here she was, walking alongside a stranger who seemed to care. Soon, they turned, down a narrow alley, and the noise of the city seemed to fade away. The man pushed open a small door at the end, revealing a dimly lit room filled with crates and boxes. It wasn't much, but it was a safe haven. He gestured for her to enter, and she hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. "It's not much, but it's enough," the man said, his voice softer now. "You'll be safe here. I'll make sure you and your child are taken care of." Tara stepped inside, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked around the small room, taking in its simplicity. It was far from luxurious, but it was a place where they wouldn't be seen, a place where for the first time in a long while she felt like she could breathe. And in that moment she realized something. This stranger, this human man, had offered her more than food. He had given her a chance to survive, a chance to keep fighting. And maybe, just maybe, that was all she needed. Tara sat in the dimly lit room, her hand still clutching the small pouch of credits that the man had given her. She had taken her child's fragile form and laid him down on a bed of old cloths, trying to make him as comfortable as possible. The coldness of the room seemed to seep into her bones, but there was something comforting about the quiet. It was different from the noise and chaos of the streets. Here she felt hidden, safe, if only for a moment. She glanced at the man who stood near the door, his face pensive, lost in thought. "You said I'm safe here," she said, her voice trembling, slightly. "But how long will that last? What if they come looking for us?" Her eyes followed his every movement, trying to read him. There was something about him, something that both comforted and unsettled her. He had helped her, yes, but he was still a stranger. She couldn't help but wonder if there was more to his offer of help than he let on. The man turned, his face shadowed by the dim light, and met her gaze. "I'll make sure they don't find you," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I won't let them hurt you or your child." She wasn't sure if she believed him entirely, but his words, filled with conviction, were enough to ease her tension just a little. She wanted to trust him, she really did. But trust was a fragile thing, something she had lost long ago when her own people turned their backs on her. "You don't owe me anything," he continued, his voice softer now. "But you and your child don't deserve to live like this. I've seen too many people who don't care, who just walk by. I don't want to be one of them." Tara looked down at her child, whose breathing had slowed, a small sign of relief on his face. She could feel the weight of her decision bearing down on her. She had always been alone, never relying on anyone, never trusting anyone. Her strength had been all she had. But now, after everything, could she afford to close her heart to this man who was offering them safety? "Why are you doing this?" she asked, the question slipping from her lips before she could stop it. "Why me? Why us?" The man paused, looking out the small window that overlooked the alley. His eyes seemed distant, as if searching for an answer he had yet to find. Finally, he turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "Because you're not invisible," he said quietly. "And because I can't just stand by and do nothing. I've seen too many people in pain, too many people ignored, forgotten. I'm tired of pretending that's okay." There was something raw in his voice, a hint of emotion that she had not expected. She had expected indifference or perhaps pity. But this was different. This man wasn't just trying to fix a problem. He was trying to make a stand against something much bigger than her or her child. Her heart skipped a beat. Could she really trust him? Could she rely on him? The questions churned in her mind, each one spinning faster than the last. Her instincts screamed at her to leave, to run, to go back to the streets where she knew how to survive. But her body, too weak to fight the exhaustion, begged for rest. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm afraid. I've been afraid for so long. I don't know who to trust anymore." The man nodded slowly as if he understood. He took a step closer to her, kneeling down beside the bed where her child slept. "You don't have to trust me right away," he said, his voice gentle. "But I can promise you this, while you're here I'll protect you, you won't be alone." She looked at him then, really looked at him. His face was weathered, worn, but his eyes were sincere. There was no trickery, no hidden agenda. Just a simple man offering help to someone who had nothing left to give. Could she accept it? She had never allowed herself to depend on anyone before, but she could feel the weight of her own survival pressing down on her. Her child needed food, safety, and she needed hope. Was this man the one who could give them that? "I don't have anything to give you in return," she said quietly, still unsure of herself. "I can't offer you anything." He smiled softly, a small and understanding smile. "You don't have to give me anything, Tara." He seemed to hesitate for a moment, his eyes flicking toward the door. Sometimes just knowing someone is there is enough. Sometimes that's all we need. The words echoed in her mind, reverberating through her heart. Was that all she needed? Could she let down her walls, if only for a moment, and accept the help being offered? Could she finally believe that someone could care enough to protect them? The idea was foreign to her, but there was something in his voice, something real, that made her want to believe it. For the first time since she had arrived on Earth, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, a life where she didn't have to beg on the streets, a life where her child could be safe, away from the cold and the hunger. She looked down at her child, his small, fragile form tucked safely in the bed, his breathing steady. "Okay," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I'll stay. For now." The man nodded, relief flooding his face. "Thank you." His voice was filled with gratitude, but also something else, something she hadn't expected. Trust. "We'll figure it out together," he added, standing up and turning toward the small window once more. "I'll make sure nothing happens to you." As Tara lay back on the bed, her heart finally felt at ease. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. She didn't have to fight alone. And as the night grew darker, she allowed herself to fall into a peaceful, albeit fragile, sleep. Tomorrow was unknown, but for tonight, they were safe. And that, for now, was enough. The dim light of the room cast long shadows on the walls, and the silence hung heavy in the air. Tara shifted uncomfortably on the makeshift bed, her thoughts racing. She had made her decision. For now, she would trust this man who had offered them safety. But as the hours passed, the weight of the unknown pressed down on her. The world outside still spun with danger, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Her child slept soundly beside her, his breath steady, but Tara's eyes remained wide open. She listened to the sound of the street outside, the faint murmur of voices and the distant hum of traffic. There was a stillness in the air that made her feel uneasy, as if something was just waiting to break through the calm. She sat up slowly, glancing toward the door. The man, her mysterious benefactor, had left only a short time ago to gather supplies. He hadn't been gone long, but the silence felt oppressive. What if someone was following him? What if they had already found them? Her heart raced at the thought. Just as she was about to lie back down, she heard a noise, a faint creak of the floorboards just outside the door. Her muscles tensed instantly, and she instinctively reached for her child, pulling him closer to her. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong. Her pulse quickened as she waited, holding her breath, the silence stretching longer than it should have. The creak came again, this time followed by the soft scrape of something heavy against the wall. The door, which had been shut quietly earlier, now seemed to vibrate slightly under an unseen pressure. Then, the door handle turned. A rush of panic flooded her chest, and her fingers clenched into fists. Who was it? Was it the man who had been helping them? Or had someone found them already? The door creaked open, just a sliver, and she heard the unmistakable sound of boots on the floor. Heavy, deliberate. A shadow loomed in the doorway, but it wasn't the man she had come to trust. This figure was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with a certain confidence that sent chills crawling up her spine. She could feel her breath catching in her throat. Her mind screamed for her to move, to act, but her body was frozen in fear. Whoever it was, they weren't here to help. The figure stepped inside, filling the doorway. He was dressed in dark clothing, his face obscured by a hood. His eyes, cold and calculating, met hers in an instant. Tara recoiled, instinctively clutching her child tighter. "So you're the one hiding here," the man said, his voice low and laced with contempt. "The runaway alien. The one who doesn't know her place." Tara's stomach twisted. She had heard those words before, back in the days of her homeworld when her people were hunted when they were nothing but prey. The same words had been used to justify the pain they had suffered. "What do you want?" she managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. The man stepped forward, slowly, his eyes scanning her face. "I'm here to collect what's mine," he said with a sneer, reaching into his pocket. "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't even be alive." The words struck her like a blow, and for a moment, she felt as though she might collapse under the weight of them. He was here to take her away, to bring her back to the people who had abandoned her. But why? Why now? What had changed? Her mind raced, but before she could respond, the man turned and gave a sharp whistle. Almost immediately, two more figures appeared in the doorway, their bodies large and imposing. They wore similar dark clothing, their faces concealed. They were a team, and they weren't here to offer help. "I'd suggest you come with us," the first man said, his voice dripping with malice. "The city has enough problems without strays like you running around." Tara's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the heat of panic rising in her throat. She wasn't going back, not after everything she had been through. She had a child to protect, a new life to build. She had to get out of here, away from these people, away from whatever they wanted with her. No. The word came out sharper than she expected, surprising even herself. I'm not going back. You can't take me. For a moment, the men stood in silence, clearly taken aback by her sudden defiance. But it didn't last long. The first man's lips curled into a cruel smile. You'll regret that, he said, stepping forward with a menacing glint in his eyes. You have no idea what you're up against. Tara's mind raced, trying to come up with a plan, any plan to escape. She had no weapons, no means of defense. Her only hope lay in the stranger who had taken them in, the man who had promised to keep them safe. But would he return in time? Would he be able to protect them from these men? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a door opening, followed by the hurried footsteps of someone entering the room. She turned her head in relief to see the man she had come to trust. He stood in the doorway, a look of surprise crossing his face when he saw the strangers in the room. What's going on here? He demanded, his voice sharp. Tara's heart leapt in her chest. He had returned, just in time. But the question now was, how could he protect them from these men? He was just one person and they were outnumbered. These people are here to take me, she said quickly, trying to keep the panic from her voice. They've come to bring me back. They think I'm some kind of prisoner. The man's eyes flicked between the strangers and Tara, his jaw tightening in anger. Not if I can help it, he said, his voice low and steady. He took a step forward, his stance defensive, his eyes locked on the intruders. The air in the room crackled, with tension as the two sides faced off, each preparing for what would come next. Tara held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Would they survive this encounter? Would the man who had helped them prove to be their savior? Or was this the moment everything would come crashing down? The air in the small room was thick with tension. Tara's heart raced as she watched the two sides stare each other down. The strangers, armed and intent on capturing her, stood ready to move, their eyes cold and calculating. The man who had taken them in stood between them and the door, his back straight and his fists clenched. He wasn't going to let them take her without a fight, but Tara couldn't shake the feeling that they were outmatched. Her child, still sleeping soundly on the bed, remained blissfully unaware of the danger creeping closer. Tara's breath caught in her throat as she realized the peril they were in. The man had promised safety, but this was a fight they couldn't win alone. She had no weapons, no way to defend herself or her son, and she had no idea how skilled the strangers were. You don't have to do this, the man said, his voice low but filled with resolve. He stood tall in the doorway, a figure of defiance. There's no need for bloodshed, just leave us be and I'll make sure you won't regret it. The first stranger, a broad-shouldered man with a scar running across his cheek, snorted. You're out of your depth, human. His voice was like gravel, deep and menacing. This is bigger than you, bigger than your little hideaway. You think you can protect her? You think you're the hero of this story? There's no escaping us. The second man stepped forward, his hand resting on a weapon at his side. His gaze never left the human, but Tara could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The human's stance was strong, unyielding. She realized in that moment that he wasn't just trying to protect her. He was willing to fight for her, and for her child. Don't make this worse, the man warned, his voice steady, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. Leave. Now. Or I'll make sure you regret it. The air crackled with the threat of violence. Tara could feel the electricity in the room, the unbearable weight of the choices that hung between them. Her instincts screamed for her to run, to take her child and flee. But where could they go? Who else would take them in? The man had already risked everything to protect them. The broad-shouldered stranger laughed darkly. You really think you can stop us? He motioned to his partner, and in an instant the second man lunged forward, pulling a weapon from his side. The sharp sound of metal scraping against metal rang out in the small room, and Tara's pulse quickened. She grabbed her child tightly, pressing him against her chest. The human didn't hesitate. He moved faster than she could track, his hands grabbing the stranger's arm and twisting it with a force that made the man stumble back. A sharp gasp escaped Tara's lips as she watched him disarm the stranger in one swift motion, knocking the weapon out of his hand and sending it clattering to the floor. The human's movements were fluid, practiced like he had fought before. "Get out," the human growled, his voice a low rumble. "Now." But the second stranger wasn't backing down. With a snarl, he rushed forward again, drawing a sharp blade from his belt. Tara's heart stopped in her chest as she saw the glint of the weapon in the dim light. "You think you can fight both of us?" The second man spat, his eyes narrowing with malice. The human didn't flinch. Instead, he sidestepped the man's wild swing, grabbing his wrist and twisting it with a brutal snap. The blade flew from the stranger's hand, and before he could react, the human had him pinned against the wall. "I said leave," he repeated, his voice now full of quiet fury. Tara was frozen, unsure of what to do. She had never seen someone fight like this, so effortlessly, so quickly. She knew the human had skills, but this was something else. He was fearless, determined to protect them at any cost. But how long could he keep this up? How much longer could they run before someone else found them? The broad-shouldered man, now recovering from his surprise, reached for a communicator at his belt. "We'll be back," he growled. "You haven't seen the last of us." Tara's breath caught in her throat as he activated the device, but before he could say another word, the human slammed a fist into his jaw, sending him crashing to the floor. "I don't care," the man said, his voice unwavering. "Leave, or I'll make sure you never bother us again." The two strangers hesitated for a moment, their eyes darting between each other and the human who stood between them and their prey. It was clear they didn't expect this kind of resistance. They had underestimated the human, but now, it seemed, they understood the cost of their actions. With a final glance at Tara and her child, the broad-shouldered man stood, his face flushed with anger. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath. "You've made a mistake, human. We'll be back, and next time you won't be so lucky." Without another word, they retreated, their footsteps fading into the distance. Tara held her breath as the door slammed shut behind them, the silence in the room more deafening than the chaos that had just unfolded. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The human was still standing in the doorway, his chest heaving with the effort. His knuckles were bruised from the fight, but there was a calmness in his eyes, as if this was all just another part of his plan. "They're gone," he said, his voice softening. "For now." Tara couldn't speak at first. She was too stunned, too shaken by what had just happened. She looked down at her child, still sound asleep, and then back at the man who had protected them. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Don't thank me yet. We're not out of danger, but for tonight we're safe. You and your son, you're safe." Her heart ached with gratitude and fear, knowing that even though they had won this small battle, the war was far from over. The men who had come for her would be back. And next time, they wouldn't be so easy to defeat. But for now, Tara let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found something worth fighting for, something worth protecting. The room was still, the only sound the gentle hum of the city outside. Tara sat on the edge of the bed, holding her child close, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The man, the one who had risked everything to protect them, stood quietly by the door, his eyes scanning the room with an intensity she couldn't quite understand. His stance was still defensive, but his eyes were calm, focused. She could feel the weight of the silence between them, the tension that still lingered from the fight. Though the strangers had retreated, the fear still clung to her like a thick fog. They had come so close, so dangerously close to taking her, to taking everything she had left, but they were gone for now. Tara looked at the man. His clothes were torn from the struggle, and there were bruises forming on his arms and hands. Yet he looked unchanged, as though he had been in battles before and had come out the other side without flinching. It was clear now that he was no ordinary human. He wasn't just some random person who had stumbled across her. He was someone who knew how to fight, how to survive, and he had chosen to fight for her. For them. "You don't have to thank me," the man said, breaking the silence, his voice softer now than it had been in the heat of the moment. It was never about thanks. It was about doing what's right. Tara didn't know how to respond. She had never known what it was like to rely on someone else, to trust someone else. She had always been on her own, always protecting herself and her child in a world that didn't care. But now, in this moment, she realized how much she had been missing, how much she had been afraid to let in. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. His eyes weren't just filled with strength. They held something else, something deeper. She couldn't name it, but it was there, in the way he stood, in the way he had acted when everything seemed lost. "Why did you help us?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "You didn't have to. You could have just walked away." The man hesitated, his gaze flickering briefly to the door, then back to her. He took a deep breath before speaking. "Because I couldn't walk away. Because I've seen too many people like you, too many people who've been left behind, and I'm tired of it. I'm tired of pretending it's not my problem." Tara's heart ached. She couldn't help but think that his words were so much like her own. She had felt the same way for so long. Alone. Forgotten. And yet here he was, standing in front of her, offering her something she had never thought she'd receive, a chance to not be invisible anymore. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The question wasn't just about the immediate danger. She was asking about everything, about the future, about what it meant to trust someone again. "Where do we go from here?" The man smiled, though it was a small, tired smile. "We take it one step at a time." His words felt like a lifeline, something solid in a world that had felt so chaotic and unstable. For the first time in so long, Tara felt like she wasn't alone, like there was someone who cared enough to help. She couldn't say why she trusted him, why she felt so safe in his presence. But she did. And for now, that was enough. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the night settling between them. The danger had passed, but the fear hadn't. Not yet. Tara's mind raced as she thought about everything that had happened. The escape, the fight, the promises made. She thought about the men who had come for her, the ones who wouldn't stop until they had her back. They would come again. Of that she was certain. But the fear wasn't as strong as it had been. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the presence of the man who had protected them, or maybe it was the way she had finally allowed herself to hope. The feeling was new, unfamiliar, but it was there. Her child stirred in her arms, and she smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair away from his face. "We're safe for now," she whispered to him, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed the words. But she had to believe them, at least for tonight. The man's eyes softened as he watched them, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to worry," he said quietly. "I'll make sure you're safe. I won't let anyone hurt you again." Tara looked up at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. There was something in his voice, something in the way he said those words that made her believe him. He had proven himself in the fight, and now he was offering her and her child something even more precious. Protection. A promise. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't know what this means to us, to me." The man nodded, his gaze gentle but unwavering. "I know." She didn't know what the future held or how long they would remain hidden from those who sought to take her child. But in that moment, with the man standing beside her and her child safe in her arms, Tara felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It was fragile, yes, but it was there, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could survive. Maybe they could find a place where they belonged, a place where they could finally be free. One step at a time, she whispered to herself, the words echoing in her mind. It was all they could do, one step at a time.